The scream that tore through the quiet morning air was enough to curdle blood. But Tessa Vaughn no longer possessed the capacity to make such a sound. She stood at the edge of her husband's fresh grave, her face as empty and still as the Oklahoma plains stretched out before her, watching the handful of townspeople shuffle away down the dusty path back toward Guthrie. They had done their Christian duty, attending the funeral of Samuel Vaughn, aged 27. Dead from a rattlesnake bite that turned his leg black and stole him from this world in 3 agonizing days. The preacher had spoken words meant to comfort, but Tessa heard none of them. She simply stood, her hands folded at her waist, her black dress hanging loose on a frame that had grown thin in the 6 months since they had arrived in this God-forsaken territory with dreams of building something together. The year was 1891, and Oklahoma was still raw and unforgiving. A place where the land claims had only recently opened, and people still fought tooth and nail for every acre. Tessa was 23 years old, and she felt ancient. The small homestead she and Samuel had claimed sat 3 miles outside of Guthrie, a modest cabin with a leaking roof and a well that ran dry more often than not. They had planned to fix it all, to build a life worth living. Now Samuel was in the ground, and Tessa was alone with nothing but debt and dust. She did not cry. She had cried herself hollow in those 3 days watching Samuel suffer, holding his burning hand while he thrashed and moaned. Now there was nothing left inside her but a vast, echoing silence. Her face, once quick to smile and light up with laughter, had become a mask of stone. The neighbors remarked on it in hushed tones, how Tessa Vaughn never shed a tear at her own husband's funeral, how she stood there like a statue carved from ice. What they did not understand was that grief had reached inside her chest and stolen something vital. It had taken her smile, her laughter, her ability to feel anything but the dull ache of loss. She walked through the world as a ghost, performing the necessary motions of living without truly inhabiting her own skin. After the last mourner disappeared over the rise, Tessa finally turned from the grave and began the long walk back to the cabin. The September sun beat down mercilessly, turning the red earth to powder beneath her boots. She had sold their only horse to pay for the coffin and the plot in the church cemetery. Everything else of value had gone to settle Samuel's debts at the general store and the land office. She had nothing now, nothing but the clothes on her back and a cabin that would likely be claimed by the bank before winter set in. She should have felt fear or despair or something. But there was only emptiness. The cabin appeared on the horizon like a cruel joke, its weathered boards and sagging porch a monument of failed dreams. Tessa climbed the steps and pushed open the door, then stopped. Someone had been inside. Her sparse belongings had been disturbed, moved slightly from where she had left them. Her heart should have hammered with alarm, but instead she merely noted the intrusion with detached observation. "Looking for something?" she asked the empty room, her voice rusty from disuse. A shadow moved in the corner, and a man stepped forward. He was rough-looking, with a scarred face and mean eyes, wearing dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips. 2 more men emerged from the bedroom, equally rough and dangerous. "Mrs. Vaughn," the first man said, his voice carrying a mocking lilt. "Sorry for your loss and all that. Name's Garrett. Your husband owed money to some people, and they sent us to collect." Tessa looked at him without expression. "He owed the bank and the general store. I know about those debts." "This is a different sort of debt," Garrett said, moving closer. "He borrowed from a man in Kansas City to stake his claim here. Borrowed heavy, and the interest has been piling up. We are here to collect." "There is nothing to collect," Tessa said flatly. "Everything is gone. Garrett's smile showed tobacco-stained teeth. Not everything. You are still here. The implication hung in the air like smoke. The other two men chuckled darkly. One of them, a wiry man with a long mustache, fingered the items on her small table as if appraising their worth. Tessa felt something flicker in the deadness inside her, the smallest spark of self-preservation. Get out of my house. Your house? Garrett laughed. Lady, nothing here is yours anymore. But I will tell you what. My employer might be willing to write off the debt if you are willing to come work for him. He runs a saloon in Kansas City, always looking for pretty girls. The meaning was crystal clear. And finally, Tessa felt something pierce through the numbness. Not fear exactly, but a bone-deep refusal to let these men take anything more from her. Samuel was gone. Her dreams were gone. But she would not give them this. No, she said. Garrett's expression hardened. That was not really a question, Mrs. Vaughn. He reached for her arm, and Tessa jerked backward, her hand closing around the iron poker by the cold fireplace. She swung it with desperate strength, catching Garrett across the shoulder. He cursed and stumbled back, and the other men rushed forward. Tessa screamed then, not from grief, but from pure survival instinct. And she swung the poker again, catching the wiry man across the knuckles. He howled and grabbed his hand. You little wildcat, Garrett snarled, drawing his gun. The cabin door exploded inward with a crash that shook the walls. All heads turned toward the massive figure that filled the doorway, blocking out the sun like a mountain come to life. The man had to duck his head to enter, his shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the frame. He wore buckskin and fur, his dark hair hanging past his shoulders, his face hidden beneath a thick beard. But his eyes were clear and sharp as flint, and they swept the scene with instant understanding. The lady said no, the mountain man rumbled, his voice so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. Garrett recovered first, swinging his gun toward the newcomer. This does not concern you, friend. Move along. The mountain man did not move along. Instead, he took one step forward, and somehow that single step contained such coiled power that all three men tensed. Put the gun away, he said quietly. Or what? Garrett challenged, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Or I will break your arm and feed it to you, the mountain man said with such calm certainty that no one doubted he could and would do exactly that. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the wiry man with the injured hand said, Come on, Garrett. This is not worth it. Garrett's jaw clenched, but he slowly lowered the gun. Fine, but this is not over, Mrs. Vaughn. That debt still stands. He pointed at the mountain man. And you just made a powerful enemy, friend. I will lose sleep over it, the mountain man said dryly. The 3 men backed toward the door, giving the mountain man a wide berth. Garrett paused at the threshold. We will be back, he promised. I will be here, the mountain man replied. They left, their boots thundering on the porch steps, and then came the sound of horses being mounted and ridden hard away from the property. The mountain man remained standing in the doorway, watching until the sounds faded completely. Only then did he turn to look at Tessa. She still held the poker, her knuckles white around the iron. She stared at this stranger who had materialized like something out of a fever dream. This giant man who had walked into her catastrophe of a life and driven off 3 armed men with nothing but his presence. She should thank him, she knew, but the words stuck in her throat. You hurt? He asked, his dark eyes scanning her for injury. Tessa shook her head slowly, then realized she should probably speak. No, I am not hurt. Her voice came out rough. Thank you. He nodded once, a slight dip of his chin. Yarrow Zimmerman? He said. Most folks call me Yarrow. Tessa Vaughn, she replied automatically. I know. I saw the funeral this morning. He paused. I am sorry for your loss. More words meant to comfort that fell flat against the granite of her grief. Tessa set down the poker, suddenly exhausted. Why are you here? Yarrow glanced around the cabin, taking in its poor condition with a practiced eye. Was passing through, headed to Guthrie for supplies. Saw those horses tied up outside, recognized the brands. Kansas City thugs. Figured someone might need help. You recognized their horses? Tessa said slowly. I pay attention, Yarrow said simply. Those men work for a man named Hutchins. He is a snake who loans money to desperate people and then bleeds them dry. He has been expanding his operations into Oklahoma territory. Tessa sank into one of the two chairs at her small table. The numbness was creeping back in, pushing away the brief spark of adrenaline. My husband never mentioned borrowing from anyone in Kansas City. Men keep secrets when they are ashamed, Yarrow said, his tone neutral. Especially from the women they love. The words hit harder than Tessa expected. Had Samuel loved her? Yes, in his way. Had he been desperate enough to borrow from criminals? Apparently. Had he told her, let her help shoulder the burden? No. And now he was dead, and she was left with the consequences. They will come back, she said dully. You heard him. They will, Yarrow agreed. He moved further into the cabin, his size making the small space feel even smaller, though oddly not threatening. Which means you cannot stay here. I have nowhere else to go, Tessa said. The statement was simple fact, delivered without self-pity. Yarrow studied her for a long moment, and Tessa felt the weight of that gaze. She wondered what he saw, this strange mountain man who had walked into her life at its lowest point. Did he see the ghost she had become? The hollow shell? I have a place up in the Wichita Mountains, Yarrow said finally. About 40 miles northwest of here. Good hunting, good water, far from people like Hutchins and his men. You could come with me. Stay until you figure out what you want to do next. Tessa blinked, trying to process the offer. You are inviting me to live with you? A stranger? I am inviting you to not get killed or worse by those men when they come back, Yarrow corrected. What you choose to do with that invitation is your business. It was a fair point. Tessa looked around the cabin, at the life she and Samuel had tried and failed to build. There was nothing here for her now. The bank would take the land, creditors would take whatever meager possessions remained, and Hutchins's men would take her if she was foolish enough to stay. She should feel something about leaving, about abandoning what little she had left. But the emptiness inside her yawned wide and cold, and she felt nothing at all. All right, she heard herself say. I will come with you. Yarrow nodded, as if he had expected this answer. Pack what you need. We will leave within the hour. Tessa moved through the cabin like a woman in a dream, gathering the few items worth taking. A change of clothes, a photograph of her and Samuel on their wedding day, her mother's silver hairbrush. Everything fit into a small canvas bag. She changed out of the funeral dress into something more practical for traveling. A simple brown skirt and white blouse with a leather vest. She braided her honey-colored hair and pinned it up, then paused to look at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the wash basin. The face that looked back was a stranger's face. Her green eyes held no light, her mouth no hint of the smile that had once come so easily. She was 23 and looked 40, worn down by grief into something brittle and hollow. Tessa turned away from the mirror, unable to bear the sight. When she emerged, Yarrow was waiting on the porch. He had a massive horse, a bay gelding that looked sturdy enough to carry his considerable weight, with supplies and furs tied behind the saddle. He took Tessa's bag without comment and secured it with the rest of his gear. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well," Tessa admitted. "We only had one horse, and Samuel usually." She trailed off, the grief tightening around her throat for a moment, before the numbness swallowed it again. Yarrow did not press. He simply swung up into the saddle with easy grace despite his size, then reached down for her. His hand was huge, calloused and strong, and when she took it, he lifted her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on," he instructed. Tessa wrapped her arms around his broad torso, feeling the solid muscle beneath the buckskin. He was like sitting behind a bear, all power and heat. The horse started forward at an easy walk, and Tessa looked back over her shoulder one last time at the cabin that had been meant to be her home. She waited for sadness, for regret, for anything. Nothing came. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, turning the Oklahoma landscape into a shimmering haze of heat. Yarrow set a steady pace, not pushing the horse, but not dawdling either. They followed game trails and creek beds, avoiding the main roads where Hutchins' men might still be lurking. Tessa held on and let her mind go blank, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the horse and the warmth radiating from Yarrow's back. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Yarrow guided the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods near a creek, and there he dismounted and helped Tessa down. Her legs were stiff and sore, unaccustomed to riding, and she stumbled slightly. Yarrow's hand steadied her elbow, then released her once she had her balance. "We will camp here tonight," he said. "Too dangerous to travel in the dark, and the horse needs rest." Tessa nodded and watched as Yarrow efficiently set about making camp. He unsaddled the horse and rubbed it down, then led it to the creek to drink before hobbling it to graze. He gathered wood and built a small fire as the light faded, then pulled supplies from his pack: dried meat, hardtack, coffee. It was more food than Tessa had seen in weeks, but when he offered her a portion, she found she had no appetite. "You need to eat," Yarrow said, his tone matter-of-fact. "I am not hungry," Tessa replied. "Did not ask if you were hungry. Said you need to eat." He pushed the food toward her. "You are already too thin. Go much longer without eating and you will get sick." There was no judgment in his voice, just pragmatic observation. Tessa picked up the dried meat and forced herself to chew and swallow. It was like eating sawdust, tasteless and dry, but she managed to get some down. Yarrow made coffee in a battered tin pot, and when it was ready, he poured her a cup. The bitter warmth helped wash down the food. They sat in silence on opposite sides of the fire as night fell completely, bringing a scattered blanket of stars overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound should have been eerie, but Tessa found it oddly fitting. Everything was wild and strange now, her entire world turned upside down. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" she asked finally, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity. 6 years, Yarrow said. "Came out here after the war ended. Needed space, quiet. The mountains gave me that." "The war," Tessa echoed. "You fought?" "Everyone fought," Yarrow said, his voice going distant. "One way or another." He did not elaborate, and Tessa did not push. She understood about things too painful to discuss. They fell back into silence, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Eventually, Yarrow spread out a bedroll for her near the fire and took his own position on the opposite side, his rifle within easy reach. "Sleep," he told her. "I will keep watch." Tessa lay down, pulling the rough blanket over herself. She stared up at the stars and waited for sleep to claim her. Her mind wandered back to Samuel, to the hopes they had carried west, to the way he had smiled when he talked about their future. He had been a good man, if impractical, and perhaps too proud to ask for help when he needed it. She had loved him, or thought she had. Now he was gone, and she was riding off into the wilderness with a stranger who looked like he had stepped out of a campfire story. She should be afraid. She should feel something. But the grief had taken it all, leaving only the empty shell of who she used to be. Sleep came eventually, fitful and dreamless. When Tessa woke, the sun was already well up, and Yarrow had coffee waiting. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory crashed back. Her body ached from the previous day's ride and sleeping on the hard ground, but she forced herself to her feet. Yarrow handed her a cup of coffee and more food, and this time she ate without protest. They broke camp quickly and were back on the horse before the morning heat grew too intense. The landscape began to change as they traveled northwest, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and rocky outcroppings. In the distance, Tessa could see the blue shadows of mountains rising against the sky. The Wichita Mountains, she presumed, where Yarrow made his home. By late afternoon, they were climbing into the foothills, following a narrow trail that wound between ancient granite boulders and stands of oak and pine. The air grew cooler, fresher, carrying the scent of growing things. Tessa found herself breathing deeper, as if trying to fill the emptiness inside with something, anything. Finally, as the sun touched the western peaks, Yarrow guided the horse through a narrow gap between two massive boulders and into a hidden valley. Tessa's breath caught despite herself. The valley was small, perhaps a few acres, but lush and green. A clear stream ran through the center, fed by a spring that bubbled up from the rocks. On one side, tucked against the slope, sat a cabin that made her own look like a child's plaything. This was a real structure, built with care and skill from solid logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Beyond it stood a lean-to for the horse and a smokehouse. Vegetable gardens grew in neat rows, and drying racks held fish and game. "This is your place?" Tessa asked, the first note of anything resembling emotion creeping into her voice. "This is it," Yarrow confirmed. He dismounted and helped her down, then led the horse to the lean-to. "Been building it piece by piece since I came out here. It suits me." It more than suited him, Tessa thought. It was beautiful in its rugged simplicity, a sanctuary carved out of the wilderness. She stood in the center of the valley, slowly turning to take it all in, and felt the first tiny crack in the ice that encased her heart. Not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement that beauty still existed in the world, even if she could no longer fully feel it. Yarrow showed her inside the cabin, and Tessa was surprised again by how comfortable it was. The single large room held a proper bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves stocked with supplies, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Furs and woven blankets added warmth, and the whole space felt solid and safe. "You take the bed," Yarrow said. "I will sleep on the porch." "That is not necessary," Tessa protested weakly. "This is your home. And you are my guest," Yarrow said firmly. "I have slept in worse places than a porch on a September night. Take the bed." Tessa was too tired to argue. She set her small bag on the floor near the bed and turned to find Yarrow watching her with an unreadable expression. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Yarrow was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "Everyone needs help sometimes. I was helped once when I needed it most. Figured I should pass that along." It was a simple answer, but Tessa sensed depths beneath it, stories untold. Before she could respond, Yarrow had turned and headed back outside to tend to his horse and secure the camp for the night. Tessa stood alone in the cabin, surrounded by the evidence of a life built with patience and purpose, and wondered what it would be like to feel that sense of purpose again. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Yarrow rose with the sun and went about his work, hunting, fishing, tending his gardens, making repairs to his structures. He was perpetually in motion, his large frame moving with surprising grace and efficiency as he performed the endless tasks required to survive alone in the mountains. Tessa tried to help where she could, though at first her contributions were minimal. She was clumsy with the unfamiliar work, weak from grief and poor eating, her mind still lost in the fog of loss. Yarrow never complained or criticized. He simply showed her what to do, patiently correcting her mistakes, and accepted whatever effort she could muster. When she burned the fish she was supposed to be watching because her attention drifted away, he just removed it from the fire and prepared more. When she accidentally overwatered the garden until it became mud, he showed her how to drain it properly and suggested she watch more carefully next time. His steadiness was like a rock in a storm, unchanging and solid. Tessa found herself drawn to it, not romantically, but as a drowning person might cling to driftwood. Here in this hidden valley, far from the memories and failures of Guthrie, she could simply exist without judgment or expectation. But she still did not smile. She still felt nothing but the vast emptiness. 2 weeks passed. The September heat gave way to cooler October mornings, and the leaves on the oak trees began to turn gold and red. Tessa grew stronger physically, her body responding to regular meals and hard work even if her spirit remained dormant. She learned to cook over the fire without burning things, to identify edible plants, to clean and prepare game that Yarrow brought back from his hunts. She learned the rhythms of this mountain life, so different from anything she had known before. Yarrow, for his part, remained a mystery. He spoke little, and when he did, it was usually about practical matters. But Tessa began to notice small things about him. The way he always checked the perimeter of the valley before settling in for the night, as if expecting threats. The nightmares that sometimes woke him, leaving him gasping and reaching for his rifle. The gentleness with which he handled injured animals, binding a bird's broken wing or removing a thorn from the horse's hoof. The scars that covered his hands and forearms, evidence of a hard life lived on the edge. He was a man who had seen darkness, she realized. He carried his own ghosts, just as she carried hers. Perhaps that was why he had helped her. Recognized something in her face that mirrored his own experience. One morning, Tessa woke to find Yarrow already gone, likely off hunting. She rose and went through her morning routine, then decided to explore beyond the immediate vicinity of the cabin. She followed the stream up toward its source, picking her way carefully over the rocks. The morning air was crisp and clean, and birds sang in the trees overhead. It was the kind of morning that should have lifted the spirits, but Tessa felt only the familiar emptiness. She reached a point where the stream widened into a small pool, fed by the spring that burst from the rocks above. The water was crystal clear, and she could see fish darting in the depths. She sat down on a flat rock and stared at the pool, watching the endless play of light on water. Her mind drifted, as it often did, back to Samuel and the life they had lost. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not hear Yarrow approach until he spoke. "Fish are biting if you want to try your hand." Tessa startled slightly and looked up to find him standing a few yards away, a string of trout over his shoulder. "I do not know how," she admitted. "I can teach you," Yarrow offered. When Tessa did not immediately refuse, he set down his catch and retrieved a fishing line from the pouch at his belt. He baited the hook with practiced ease and showed her how to cast it into the pool, then handed the line to her. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, Tessa holding the fishing line, while Yarrow kept a patient watch. After several minutes, the line jerked in her hands. "Pull," Yarrow instructed, and Tessa did, hauling a fat trout out of the water. It flopped on the rocks, silver scales flashing in the sun. "I caught a fish," Tessa said, the words flat and factual. "You did?" Yarrow agreed. He dispatched it quickly and humanely, then added it to his string. "Natural talent." There might have been the faintest hint of humor in his voice, but Tessa could not be sure. She handed back the fishing line, and Yarrow baited it again. They caught 3 more fish before Yarrow declared it enough for dinner and their immediate needs. As they walked back to the cabin, Yarrow said, "You are getting stronger. The work is good for you." "My body is stronger," Tessa corrected. "The rest of me is still broken." It was the first time she had acknowledged it out loud, the brokenness that lived inside her. Yarrow glanced at her, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Broken things can be mended," he said quietly. "Takes time, but it can be done." "Some things cannot be fixed," Tessa replied. "Some things are too shattered." Yarrow stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "You think you are too shattered?" he asked, his voice gentle but direct. Tessa met his gaze, and for a moment, the walls around her grief cracked just slightly. "I do not feel anything anymore," she admitted. "Not happy, not sad, not afraid. It is all just empty. I look at myself in the reflection of the water, and I do not recognize who I see. That person used to smile, used to laugh. Now she is just a hollow shell going through the motions. I think maybe whoever I was died with Samuel, and what is left is just a ghost pretending to be alive." The words poured out before she could stop them, more than she had spoken at once in weeks. Yarrow listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable behind his beard. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I know that feeling," he said. "After the war, I felt the same. Watched too many friends die, did things I will never forgive myself for. When it was over, I came home and everyone expected me to be the same person I was before. But that person was gone, killed somewhere on a battlefield whose name I cannot even remember. I was just a shell wearing his face." Tessa stared at him, surprised by the confession. "What did you do?" "I ran," Yarrow said simply. "Came out here where nobody knew me or had expectations. Spent 2 years barely surviving, not because I was trying to die, but because I did not care enough to try living. Then one day I realized I was still alive despite myself, and maybe that meant something. So I started building this place, piece by piece. Found that the work helped, giving myself purpose, even small things like planting a garden or fixing a roof. It brought me back bit by bit. Not all the way, maybe never all the way, but enough." "Enough," Tessa repeated softly. The idea seemed impossible, that she could ever feel enough to make living worth it again. But Yarrow stood before her as living proof that survival was possible, that the empty shell could be filled again, even if not completely. You will find your way, Yarrow said. Just takes time. They resumed walking, and Tessa mulled over his words. Time. She had nothing but time now, stretching ahead of her like the endless Oklahoma plains. The question was whether time would heal or simply stretch the pain out longer. That night, as they sat by the fire eating the fish they had caught, Tessa found herself studying Yarrow more openly. The firelight played across his features, illuminating the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard, the broad set of his shoulders, the capable hands that could snap a neck or mend a broken wing with equal ease. He was perhaps 30 years old, she guessed, though the hardness of his life made it difficult to tell. His hair, dark brown and hanging past his shoulders, was bound back with a leather cord. His eyes, when they met hers, held a depth that spoke of suffering endured and wisdom earned. He was, she realized with some surprise, handsome in a rough, wild way. Not the polished handsomeness of town men like Samuel had been, but something more primal and real. And he had been nothing but kind to her, asking nothing in return, simply offering shelter and patience, while she tried to find her footing in a world that had collapsed around her. "Why did you really bring me here?" Tessa asked suddenly. The truth this time. Yarrow looked up from his food, meeting her gaze across the fire. For a long moment he was silent, considering. Then he said, "Because I saw you standing at that grave looking like I felt 6 years ago. And I remembered what it was like to have nobody offer a hand. Figured maybe I could be for you what I wish someone had been for me." The simple honesty of it struck something deep in Tessa's chest, a note that resonated in the emptiness. "You barely know me," she said, her voice rough. "I could be anyone, anything. You are a woman who lost everything and is trying to figure out how to keep breathing," Yarrow said. "That is all I need to know." Tessa felt her eyes burn, the first hint of tears in weeks. But they did not fall, locked behind the dam of her grief. She looked away, swallowing hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not think I have properly thanked you for any of this." "No thanks needed," Yarrow said. "Just get better. That is thanks enough." The conversation lapsed back into comfortable silence, but something had shifted between them. A small bridge had been built, a connection forged in shared understanding of pain and survival. It was not much, but it was something. October deepened into November. The weather turned colder, frost appearing on the grass in the mornings. Yarrow began preparations for winter, smoking and drying meat, reinforcing the cabin against the coming snows, chopping massive quantities of firewood. Tessa helped with what she could, her strength and skill growing with each passing day. She still did not smile, but the sharp edge of her grief had begun to dull slightly. She found herself noticing small things again. The way the light slanted through the valley in the late afternoon, turning everything golden. The musical quality of the stream as it burbled over rocks. The taste of fresh venison cooked with wild herbs. These observations did not bring joy exactly, but they brought awareness, a recognition that the world continued to turn, and there was still beauty in it, even if she felt disconnected from it. Yarrow continued his patient steadiness, neither pushing her to recover faster nor treating her like she was fragile and broken. He simply included her in his daily life, sharing his work and his meals, offering companionship without demands. They talked more as the days passed, small conversations about practical things or observations about the natural world around them. Yarrow proved to be knowledgeable about the mountains, able to read weather in the sky and animal behavior in the tracks on the ground. He taught her these things without fanfare, the way he taught her everything, through patient demonstration and gentle correction. One day in mid-November, Tessa was working in the cabin, organizing the supplies they had put up for winter, when she heard Yarrow call her name with an urgency that brought her running outside. She found him at the edge of the valley, rifle in hand, staring down the trail they had ridden in on weeks before. "What is it?" she asked, her heart suddenly hammering. "Riders," Yarrow said grimly. "3 of them, coming this way. Can't make out who yet, but this trail does not get much traffic." Tessa's blood ran cold. She knew, somehow, who it would be. "Hutchins' men," she said. "They found me." Yarrow's jaw tightened. "Get inside the cabin. There's a rifle on the wall above the fireplace and ammunition in the cabinet below. If things go bad, you use it." "Yarrow?" Tessa started, but he cut her off. "Inside. Now." The command in his voice brooked no argument. Tessa retreated to the cabin, her hands shaking as she retrieved the rifle and checked that it was loaded. Through the window, she watched Yarrow position himself near the narrow gap that served as the valley's entrance. His own rifle held ready, but not yet raised. His posture was relaxed, but Tessa could see the coiled tension in his shoulders, like a mountain cat preparing to spring. The riders appeared a few minutes later, picking their way carefully through the gap. Tessa recognized Garrett in the lead, with his scarred face and mean eyes, followed by the wiry man with the mustache. The third man was new, younger and harder looking, with a gun belt that showed heavy use. They stopped when they saw Yarrow blocking the path. Garrett's face split into a cold smile. Well, the mountain man. We meet again." "This is private property," Yarrow said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You are not welcome here." "That is not very neighborly," Garrett replied. "We are just looking for someone. A woman, Mrs. Vaughn. Her husband owed money and she ran off before we could collect. You would not happen to know where she is, would you?" "Even if I did, I would not tell you," Yarrow said. Garrett's smile faded. "See, that is a problem. My employer does not like it when people run out on their debts. And he really does not like it when folks interfere with his business. You interfered back in Guthrie, and now it seems you might be harboring a fugitive. That makes you an accomplice." "Tessa Vaughn owes nothing to your employer," Yarrow said, his voice hardening. "Whatever her husband borrowed died with him. You have no claim on her." "The law might see it different," the young gunman said, speaking for the first time. His hand rested on his revolver, ready to draw. "We are a long way from any law out here," Yarrow observed. "And I am guessing you boys did not come all this way to have a legal debate." Garrett's expression turned ugly. "Last chance, mountain man. Hand over the woman, and we will leave peaceful. Refuse, and we will take her anyway. And you can die trying to stop us." Yarrow's response was to slowly raise his rifle, the barrel pointing directly at Garrett's chest. "You are welcome to try," he said quietly. "But I can promise you, at least one of you will not ride away from here." The standoff stretched, tense and brittle. Tessa's hands tightened on her own rifle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had seen men die before, had watched Samuel slip away, despite her desperate attempts to save him. She did not want to see Yarrow die, realized with sudden clarity that she could not bear to lose someone else, even this taciturn mountain man she had known for less than 2 months. The wiry man shifted nervously in his saddle. "Garrett, maybe we should just go. This is not worth it." "Shut up," Garrett snapped, but Tessa could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the odds. wondering if Hutchins' money was worth dying in this forgotten valley. The young gunman looked eager for the fight, his hand twitching near his gun, but Garrett had survived this long by knowing when to push and when to fold. Finally, Garrett spat in the dirt. "This is not over," he said. "Hutchins has a long memory and deep pockets. He will send more men, better men. You cannot guard her forever, mountain man." "I can guard her long enough," Yarrow replied. Garrett jerked his horse's head around and spurted back toward the gap. The other two followed, the young gunman casting a challenging look back at Yarrow that promised future violence. Then they were gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading down the mountain trail. Yarrow stood motionless for several long minutes, watching and listening, his rifle still ready. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he lower the weapon and turn back toward the cabin. Tessa met him at the door, still clutching her rifle. "They will come back," she said, the words heavy with certainty. "Probably," Yarrow agreed. He took the rifle from her hands and set it aside, then placed his own against the wall. "But not today. This is my fault," Tessa said, guilt crushing down on her. "I brought this to your door. You should not have to fight my battles." Yarrow looked at her, really looked at her, and Tessa saw something fierce and protective in his eyes. "You did not bring anything to my door. Your husband made choices, and greedy men are trying to make you pay for them. That is not your fault, and I will not let them take you." "Why?" Tessa asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why are you willing to die for someone you barely know?" Yarrow was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because you matter. Maybe you do not feel it right now. Maybe you cannot see it through the grief. But you matter. And I am damn tired of good people getting destroyed by vultures." Something cracked inside Tessa's chest, the ice that had encased her heart splitting just a little wider. She felt the burn of tears again, and this time one escaped, sliding hot down her cheek before she could stop it. It was the first tear she had shed since Samuel's funeral, the first sign that the frozen wasteland inside her might be capable of thawing. Yarrow reached up and gently wiped the tear away with his thumb, his touch surprisingly soft for such a large, rough man. "It is all right," he said quietly. "You are safe here." Tessa wanted to believe him, but safety felt like a foreign concept. Still, standing there in the doorway of his cabin with his hand warm against her face, she felt something stir in the emptiness. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the smallest seed of hope. The encounter with Hutchins's men changed the atmosphere in the valley. Yarrow became more vigilant, always keeping his weapons close, frequently checking the trail for signs of intruders. He taught Tessa to shoot properly, spending hours with her practicing on targets until she could hit what she aimed at more often than not. He showed her defensive positions around the cabin, places where she could take cover if fighting started. "I do not want to kill anyone," Tessa said one day as they practiced. "Neither do I," Yarrow replied. "But wanting and being willing are two different things. If they come back, if they try to take you, I need to know you will defend yourself." Tessa understood. She practiced diligently, learning to load and fire, to compensate for recoil, to stay calm under pressure. But more than the shooting lessons, she found herself learning about Yarrow through the small details he let slip. He had been a sharpshooter in the war, she learned, attached to various units as they moved through the South. He had seen Atlanta burn and Vicksburg fall. He had killed men, many men, and it haunted him in the dark hours of the night. "Do you regret it?" Tessa asked once. "Fighting, I mean." Yarrow considered the question seriously. "I regret what it turned me into," he said finally. "I regret the things I saw and had to do. but I do not regret fighting for what I believed was right. The world needed changing, and sometimes change requires blood. I just wish it had not required so much of mine. Tessa understood that too. The weight of sacrifices made for beliefs held. She told him about her life before Samuel, growing up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. She had been educated, unusual for a woman of her class, and had dreamed of teaching herself. Then she had met Samuel at a church social, charming and handsome and full of dreams about making a fortune in Oklahoma Territory. She had loved his optimism, his belief that they could build something together. So she had followed him west, leaving behind her family and her dreams, only to watch everything crumble into dust. Do you regret that? Yarrow asked. Marrying him, coming west? I regret that he died, Tessa said slowly. I regret that we were not strong enough or lucky enough to make it work. But I do not regret trying. At least I tried. November gave way to December, and the first serious snows arrived. The valley transformed into a pristine white wonderland, beautiful and isolating. Yarrow had prepared well, and they had ample supplies to last through the winter. The cabin stayed warm with the stone fireplace, and the days fell into a comfortable rhythm of work and rest. Confined by the weather and the smaller range of movement, Tessa and Yarrow spent more time together in the cabin, and their conversations deepened. They talked about books they had read, places they hoped to see someday, philosophies and beliefs. Yarrow had a sharp mind beneath his rough exterior, and Tessa found herself challenged and engaged in ways she had not been since leaving Ohio. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and considered her opinions with respect. One evening, as they sat by the fire with the wind howling outside, Yarrow said, "You smiled today, just for a second, but I saw it." Tessa blinked, surprised. I did. When you were feeding the horse and it tried to eat your hair, you smiled. Tessa tried to remember the moment. And yes, there it was. A tiny flash of amusement when the horse had been more interested in her braid than the feed she was offering. She had not even realized it happened. I suppose I did, she said slowly. Progress, Yarrow said, the corner of his mouth quirking slightly beneath his beard. It might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell. Is that something you do often? Tessa asked. Smile. Not often, Yarrow admitted. Not much reason to, living alone. But you are not alone now, Tessa pointed out. No, Yarrow agreed, his dark eyes finding hers across the firelight. I am not. Something passed between them in that moment. An acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared isolation and survival. It was not romance, not yet, but it was something real and solid. A foundation being laid, stone by stone. Christmas came, marked only by Yarrow producing a small cake he had made from their precious sugar stores, and Tessa digging out a pair of wool socks she had been secretly knitting for him using yarn unraveled from an old sweater. They exchanged gifts with quiet pleasure, and for a few hours, the cabin felt almost festive despite the howling wind outside. My mother used to make a cake just like this, Tessa said, savoring the rare sweetness. For Christmas and birthdays. Mine too, Yarrow said. I have not had it since she died. Tried to make it from memory. You did well, Tessa assured him. Then, hesitantly, she asked, when did she die? During the war. Fever took her while I was off fighting. I got the letter 3 months after it happened. Never got to say goodbye. The pain in his voice was old, but still sharp. I am sorry, Tessa said, and meant it. I know what it is like to lose someone without warning. They sat in shared silence, two people bound by grief and loss, finding comfort in the understanding that some pains never fully heal. You just learn to carry them differently. Winter deepened, January bringing blizzards that piled snow higher than the cabin's windows. They were completely isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. But Tessa found she did not mind. Here in the valley with Yarrow, she felt safer than she had in months. The constant vigilance for Hutchins' men had eased with the impassable snow, though Yarrow never completely relaxed his guard. Tessa continued to heal, slowly and unevenly. She smiled more often now, small expressions that felt strange on her face after so long without them. She laughed once, a rusty sound that startled her. When Yarrow told a story about a raccoon that had stolen his supplies years ago. The laughter felt foreign, but also good, like stretching a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. She caught Yarrow watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her now. Was she still the broken woman he had rescued from Guthrie? Or was she becoming something else? She knew she was changing, could feel it in the way the world seemed sharper somehow, colors brighter, sounds clearer. The numbness was receding, leaving behind raw sensitivity that was sometimes painful, but at least proved she could still feel. And she felt things when she looked at Yarrow. Gratitude, certainly, but also affection and respect. She admired his strength, not just the physical power in his broad shoulders and muscled arms, but the strength of character that allowed him to be gentle, despite the violence he carried inside. She appreciated his patience, the way he had given her space to heal while providing steady support, and she was drawn to him, she realized with some surprise, attracted to this rough mountain man in ways she had not been attracted to anyone since Samuel. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Was it too soon? Samuel had been dead less than 6 months. Shouldn't she still be in mourning, devoted to his memory? But another part of her, the part that was slowly coming back to life, whispered that Samuel would not have wanted her to bury herself in grief forever. He had loved her, in his flawed human way, and he would have wanted her to find happiness again. And Yarrow made her feel things. When he smiled his rare smile, something warm bloomed in her chest. When his hand brushed hers passing a cup of coffee, electricity sparked across her skin. When she woke in the night and heard him moving around outside, checking the perimeter even in the dead of winter, she felt protected and valued in a way she had never quite felt before. But did he feel the same? Yarrow was difficult to read, his emotions locked behind walls almost as thick as hers had been. He was kind and attentive, but he maintained a careful distance, never pushing, never crossing the invisible line between host and something more. Tessa did not know if that was because he did not see her that way, or because he was trying to respect her grief and vulnerable state. February arrived, and with it, the first hints of thaw. The days grew slightly longer, the sun stronger. Yarrow began preparing for spring, planning the season's planting and repairs. He talked about taking her to Guthrie once the weather fully broke, giving her the option to return to civilization if she wanted. The thought filled Tessa with unexpected dread. Return to what? She had nothing in Guthrie but bad memories and unpaid debts. Here in the valley, she had purpose and peace. She had Yarrow. What if I do not want to go back? She asked one evening. Yarrow looked up from the trap he was repairing, surprise evident in his eyes. You want to stay here? I do, Tessa said, the certainty of it settling into her bones. If you will have me. I know I have been a burden, but I can earn my keep. I am stronger now, more useful. I could help with the work, The planting? I could. Tessa, Yarrow interrupted gently. You have never been a burden. And yes, if you want to stay, you are welcome here for as long as you like. Relief flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Thank you, she breathed. Yarrow set aside the trap and rose, crossing the small space between them. He was so large he seemed to fill the cabin, but Tessa did not feel crowded or threatened. She felt sheltered. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. Of course. Why do you want to stay? Really? Tessa considered the question, wanting to give him the truth. Because here, with you, I remember what it feels like to be alive. In Guthrie, I was just going through the motions, empty inside. But here, I am finding pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. And I think it is because of you, because of the way you have been patient with me and given me space to heal. I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you. The last words came out barely above a whisper, but they hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Yarrow stared at her, something fierce and vulnerable flickering across his face. His hand came up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses, but warm, and Tessa leaned into it without thinking. Aunt Tessa, he said, his voice rough. I need you to be sure about this, about staying, about what you might be feeling. You have been through so much, and I will not take advantage of that. If you are here just because you feel grateful or because you are not ready to face the world yet, that is all right. I will still help you, still let you stay. But if you are here because you feel something more, I need to know. Because I feel it too. Have been feeling it for weeks now. And it has been driving me near crazy trying to keep my distance and be a gentleman about it. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you feel? She asked, needing to hear him say it. Like I have been living in the dark for 6 years, and you are the first light I have seen, Yarrow said. Like maybe I rescued you from Guthrie. But you have been rescuing me right back, without even knowing it. Like maybe this valley would not feel nearly as empty once you leave. Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks, but they were not tears of grief this time. They were tears of relief and hope and the overwhelming rush of emotion that comes from being seen and valued. Then I will not leave, she said. I am staying. Not because I am afraid or grateful, but because I am falling in love with you, Yarrow Zimmerman. And I think I want to see where that leads. The transformation that came over Yarrow's face was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Joy, pure and unguarded, lit his features, and he smiled. Really smiled, for the first time since she had known him. Then he was pulling her close, his arms enveloping her in warmth and safety. And Tessa buried her face against his broad chest and cried, releasing months of pent-up emotion in great, gasping sobs. Yarrow held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. When the storm finally passed, Tessa pulled back enough to look up at him. His eyes were wet too, she realized, and that made her feel less foolish about her own tears. I thought I would never feel anything again, she whispered. Thought that part of me died with Samuel. But you showed me it was just hidden, buried under all the grief. You brought it back. We brought each other back, Yarrow corrected. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to refuse, and brushed his lips against hers in the softest, most tender kiss Tessa had ever experienced. It was nothing like Samuel's kisses, which had been enthusiastic but clumsy. This was different, charged with deeper emotion and restrained passion, a promise of more to come, but also complete in itself. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, genuine smiles that transformed their faces. Tessa realized that this was the first time she had seen Yarrow truly happy, and the sight was beautiful. He was beautiful, this rough mountain man with a gentle soul. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Yarrow said simply. "Together, if that is what you want." "That is exactly what I want," Tessa confirmed. They sealed it with another kiss, longer and deeper this time, and Tessa felt the last of the ice around her heart finally melt away. The grief would always be part of her, a scar she would carry, but it no longer defined her. She had found her smile again, found her life again, and she had found love in the most unexpected place. The winter finally released its grip in March, the snow melting to reveal new growth underneath. Yarrow and Tessa worked side by side to prepare the gardens and make repairs to the cabin and outbuildings. They talked about the future now, making plans together. Yarrow wanted to expand the vegetable gardens, maybe add some chickens. Tessa wanted to plant flowers, to bring more beauty into the valley that had become her home. They were planting early peas one warm afternoon when Yarrow said casually, "We should probably get married." Tessa looked up surprised. "Is that a proposal?" Yarrow paused, then set down his shovel and turned to face her properly. "I suppose it is. I am not good with fancy words. But I love you, Tessa. I want to build a life with you, proper and legal. Will you marry me?" It was the least romantic proposal imaginable, delivered covered in dirt in the middle of a garden. But Tessa found it perfect because it was completely Yarrow. "Yes," she said, grinning. "Of course I will marry you." Yarrow swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, they kissed with mud-stained hands and dirt-smudged faces. And Tessa thought she had never been happier. The question was where and how to get married. The nearest town was Guthrie, but that came with the risk of running into Hutchins' men again. Yarrow was willing to risk it for Tessa, but she proposed an alternative. They could ride to the next town over, a place called Cash, where nobody knew them and they could marry quietly. It would take a few days of travel, but with spring arriving, the journey should be manageable. They set out a week later, both armed and watchful. The trip was uneventful, and they reached Cash without incident. The town was small but had a church and a minister who was happy to perform a marriage ceremony for a small fee. They bought Tessa a simple blue dress from the general store, and Yarrow cleaned up as best he could, trimming his beard and braiding his long hair back. The ceremony was brief and plain, with the minister's wife and the store clerk serving as witnesses. But when Tessa spoke her vows, looking into Yarrow's dark eyes and seeing the love and devotion there, she meant every word with her whole heart. And when Yarrow slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, purchased with money from selling furs, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said with a smile. Yarrow did not need to be told twice. He pulled Tessa close and kissed her thoroughly, earning a delighted laugh from the minister's wife. When they finally pulled apart, both were blushing but grinning. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Yarrow said, testing out the name. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Tessa agreed, liking the sound of it. She was no longer Tessa Vaughn, no longer tied to the grief and failure of that life. She was Tessa Zimmerman now, wife to a mountain man, and her future stretched out bright and full of possibility. They spent their wedding night at the small inn in Cash, a luxury after months of rough living. and Tessa discovered that the passion between them was every bit as intense as she had imagined. Yarrow was gentle but thorough, worshipping her body with reverent touches and whispered words of love. Tessa had thought she knew what physical intimacy was from her marriage to Samuel. But this was different, deeper, a joining of not just bodies, but souls. Afterward, lying wrapped in Yarrow's arms with her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat, Tessa felt complete in a way she had never experienced. This was what it meant to be truly seen and loved, to give yourself completely to another person and receive the same in return. Happy? Yarrow rumbled, his hand stroking lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Deliriously, Tessa confirmed. You? More than I ever thought possible, Yarrow admitted. I thought I would live and die alone in these mountains. Never imagined I would find someone like you, someone who understands the darkness but chooses the light anyway. We chose the light together, Tessa said, echoing his words from months before. And we will keep choosing it every day. They returned to the valley the next morning, traveling slowly and savoring the journey as newlyweds. When they crested the final rise and saw their home spread out below, Tessa felt a surge of pure joy. This was home now, truly home, and she was returning to it with her husband at her side. Spring exploded across the land with enthusiasm. The gardens flourished under their combined care, and Tessa added flowers as planned, bright splashes of color that made Yarrow smile every time he saw them. They fell into the rhythm of married life, learning each other's habits and preferences, negotiating the small conflicts that come with sharing space, and deepening their bond with every passing day. In late April, they were working on constructing a chicken coop when they heard horses approaching up the trail. Yarrow immediately tensed, reaching for the rifle he always kept nearby. Tessa's hand went to the pistol at her hip, a gift from Yarrow, who had insisted she stay armed at all times. 3 riders emerged through the gap, and Tessa's heart sank as she recognized Garrett in the lead. But something was different this time. Garrett's hands were raised, showing he was unarmed, and the 2 men with him had their hands clearly visible as well, away from their weapons. Easy now, Garrett called out. We come to talk, not fight. Yarrow did not lower his rifle. Talk fast. Garrett dismounted slowly, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening. His face was haggard, and up close, Tessa could see he had aged considerably since their last encounter. Hutchins is dead, he said bluntly. Shot in Kansas City 2 months ago by a man whose daughter he tried to force into his saloon. Everything fell apart after that, his whole operation. The law came down hard once they had an excuse, rounded up most of his people. The ones who survived scattered. And you are here why? Yarrow asked, suspicion evident in his voice. To tell you the debt is gone, Garrett said. There's nobody left to collect it. And frankly, I am tired of this business. I am heading west, planning to try my hand at honest work for a change. Thought you should know you do not have to worry about anyone coming after you anymore. Tessa stepped forward, studying Garrett's face for signs of deception. Why should we believe you? Because I got nothing to gain by lying, Garrett said wearily. Hutchins is dead, his money is gone, and I barely escaped with my life. I am done with all of it. Consider this my apology for the trouble we caused. I should have never come after you in the first place. Your husband's debt was not your burden to bear. Yarrow and Tessa exchanged a glance. After a long moment, Yarrow slowly lowered his rifle. All right, I believe you. But if you are lying, if you come back here with men in trouble, I will hunt you down myself. Understood? Understood, Garrett agreed. He climbed back onto his horse, and his companions did the same. For what it is worth, you two look good together. Happy. I hope it stays that way. He tipped his hat and turned his horse back toward the gap. They watched until the riders disappeared down the trail. Then Yarrow turned to Tessa. What do you think? I think he was telling the truth, Tessa said slowly. And I think we are finally free. The weight that had been sitting on her shoulders since the day those men appeared in her cabin in Guthrie finally lifted. She was free, truly free to live her life without fear of being dragged back into the consequences of Samuel's mistakes. She could move forward with Yarrow without that shadow hanging over them. Yarrow pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the middle of their valley, holding each other as relief washed over them both. Free, Yarrow echoed. I like the sound of that. Summer arrived in full glory, and with it came a contentment Tessa had never imagined possible. She and Yarrow worked hard during the long days, but they also took time to enjoy the life they were building. They swam in the cold mountain stream on hot afternoons, made love under the stars on warm nights, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Tessa had her smile back fully now, laughing often and freely. The woman who had stood at Samuel's grave with a face like stone was gone, replaced by someone who had been tempered by grief but not destroyed by it. She was stronger for having survived it, more appreciative of joy because she knew intimately how precious and fragile it could be. In August, Tessa realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Yarrow one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I am with child, she said simply. Yarrow's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He let out a whoop of joy that probably echoed across half the mountain, then swept her up and spun her around just as he had when she accepted his marriage proposal. A baby? He said, wonder in his voice. We are having a baby. We are, Tessa confirmed, laughing at his enthusiasm. Are you happy about it? Happy does not begin to cover it, Yarrow said, setting her down gently as if she might break. I never thought I would have a family, never let myself hope for it. And now I have you and a baby on the way. I feel like the luckiest man alive. We are both lucky, Tessa said, placing his large hand on her still flat stomach. We found each other when we both needed it most, and we built something real. This baby is just the next chapter. Yarrow became impossibly more protective and attentive during Tessa's pregnancy. He insisted she rest more, do less strenuous work, eat more food. Tessa tolerated his hovering with good humor, recognizing it for the love it was. She felt good during the pregnancy, strong and healthy, and she continued to work alongside Yarrow as much as he would allow. As fall arrived and Tessa's belly swelled with new life, they made preparations for the baby's arrival. Yarrow built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it for hours until there was not a single rough edge. Tessa sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric they purchased on a trip to Cache, her heart full as she imagined the small person who would wear them. Winter came again, and with it, the isolation they had experienced the year before. But this time, it felt different. They were not two wounded people seeking shelter, but a family preparing for its newest member. Yarrow read to Tessa from the few books they owned, his deep voice rumbling through stories while she knitted and sewed. They talked about names, about how they would raise their child, about the future they were creating together. In February, as a blizzard raged outside, Tessa's labor began. Yarrow, who had faced death in war without flinching, went pale with terror. But he rallied quickly, helping Tessa through the contractions with steady hands and soothing words. They had known they would be alone for the birth, too isolated for a doctor or midwife. And Yarrow had prepared as best he could by reading everything he could find about delivering babies. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Tessa thought she might die from the pain, but Yarrow never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. And finally, as the sun broke through the clouds after the storm, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Yarrow said. His voice choked with emotion as he carefully cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft cloth. "We have a son." Tessa held out her arms, exhausted but elated, and Yarrow placed the tiny bundle against her chest. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and dark eyes that seemed to look right at her. Love exploded in Tessa's chest, so powerful it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Yarrow's, a new life created from their love. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting for you." They named him Marcus, after Yarrow's father, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Yarrow was a devoted father, holding Marcus for hours while Tessa rested, changing diapers without complaint, singing nonsense songs in his deep, rumbling voice that made the baby coo contentedly. Tessa had never seen him happier, and the sight of her huge, rough mountain man cradling their tiny son with such infinite gentleness made her fall in love with him all over again. As spring arrived and Marcus grew from a wrinkled newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 2 years ago, she had stood at a grave with a heart turned to stone, unable to imagine ever feeling joy again. She had lost everything and believed herself to be irreparably broken. But Yarrow had seen past the brokenness to the woman underneath. He had offered her shelter and patience, giving her the space and safety to heal at her own pace. He had not tried to fix her or rush her recovery, but simply walked beside her, day by day, until she found her own way back to the light. And in doing so, he had healed himself as well, the two of them rescuing each other without even realizing it. Now she had a life richer and more fulfilling than any she had imagined. She had a husband who loved her with quiet, steadfast devotion. She had a son who brought joy every single day with his gummy smiles and baby laughter. She had a home in this hidden valley, a sanctuary built with hard work and love. And most importantly, she had herself back, whole and healed, capable of feeling the full range of human emotion from grief to joy. The grief over Samuel would always be part of her story, a chapter she could not erase. But it was no longer the only chapter. She had moved forward, built new chapters filled with love and family and purpose. She had learned that the human heart was more resilient than she ever knew, capable of being shattered and then pieced back together, often stronger in the broken places. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch with Marcus sleeping peacefully in his cradle between them, Yarrow reached over and took Tessa's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming here with me that first day?" Tessa turned to look at him, at this man who had become her entire world, and smiled the bright, genuine smile that had taken so long to return. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me back my life, Yarrow. You found the parts of me that grief had hidden and brought them back to the light. I will never regret that." "You did the same for me," Yarrow said, squeezing her hand. "I was just existing before you arrived, going through the motions. You made me want to really live again." They sat in comfortable silence, Watching the sun set over the mountains, the sky painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Marcus stirred and made a small sound, and Tessa reached down to rock the cradle gently. Their son settled back into sleep with a contented sigh. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Tessa asked. Yarrow considered the question. "More of this, I hope. Working the land, raising our son, maybe having more children if we are blessed. Growing old together in this valley. It might not sound exciting to some folks, but it sounds perfect to me." "It sounds perfect to me too," Tessa agreed. "Simple and peaceful and full of love. That is all anyone really needs." The years that followed proved them right. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Eleanor, and another son they called James. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the valley rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Yarrow proved to be the kind of father Tessa had hoped he would be. Patient and loving, teaching his children about the natural world and how to live in harmony with it. Tessa educated their children herself, passing on the love of learning her own father had instilled in her. They faced challenges, of course. Illness, harsh winters, the endless work required to maintain their homestead. But they faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. The isolation that might have driven some people mad became their sanctuary, a place where they could raise their family according to their own values, away from the corruption and cruelty that sometimes infected the wider world. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yarrow took Tessa to the spot where they had first spoken as husband and wife, the church in Cash where they had married so quietly. The town had grown in the intervening years, but the church remained the same. They renewed their vows there, with their 3 children as witnesses, reaffirming the commitment they had made to each other. 10 years, Tessa said as they rode back toward the mountains, the children chattering happily behind them. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Yarrow said. "I can barely remember what life was like before you. But it also feels like I have always known you. Because we were meant to find each other," Tessa said with certainty. 2 broken people who fit together perfectly, all the jagged edges aligning to make something whole and beautiful. "You have a poet's soul," Yarrow teased gently. "And you have a romantic's heart hidden under all those muscles," Tessa countered, making him laugh. As they crested the final rise and saw their valley spread out below, home to the life they had built together, Tessa felt the familiar swell of gratitude and contentment. She had her smile back, had had it back for years now, and it came easily and often these days. She had found it in the most unexpected place, brought back from the depths of grief by a gentle mountain man who understood darkness but chose light. Marcus, now 9 years old, rode ahead eagerly, wanting to be the first one home. Eleanor and James, 7 and 5 respectively, chattered about everything they had seen in town. Yarrow reached over and took Tessa's hand, and she squeezed back, communicating without words the love and appreciation that flowed between them constantly. This was what happiness looked like, Tessa thought. Not the absence of pain or difficulty, but the presence of love and purpose and family. It was the sound of children laughing, the warmth of her husband's hand in hers, the beauty of the mountains at sunset. It was hard work and simple pleasures, struggles overcome and triumphs celebrated. It was everything she had thought she lost forever that day at Samuel's grave, and so much more than she could have imagined. The woman who had stood there, hollow and broken, would barely recognize the woman she had become. And that was as it should be. Growth and change were the natural order of things. Grief had transformed her, yes, but love had completed that transformation, turning loss into strength and despair into hope. Years continued to pass. Marcus grew into a young man, much like his father, tall and strong with a gentle heart. He eventually married a girl from Cash and built his own cabin in a neighboring valley, close enough to visit, but far enough to establish his own life. Eleanor proved to have her mother's quick mind and love of learning, eventually becoming a teacher in Cash. James, the youngest, inherited his father's love of the wilderness and became a skilled trapper and guide. Tessa and Yarrow grew old together in their valley, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of a life lived fully. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with time, aged like fine wine into something precious and irreplaceable. On Tessa's 50th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had come to celebrate, Yarrow pulled her aside during the festivities. They walked to the stream where they had spent so many quiet moments over the years, and he took both her hands in his. "Do you know what I love most about you?" he asked. "My cooking," Tessa guessed, smiling. "Your smile," Yarrow said seriously. "Not because it is beautiful, though it is, but because I remember when you did not have it, when grief had stolen it away. And I remember the day it started to come back, bit by bit. Every time you smile, even now after all these years, I remember what a gift it is, what a gift you are." Tears pricked Tessa's eyes, the good kind of tears that come from being deeply moved. "You gave me that gift," she said. "You found my smile when I thought it was lost forever. You brought it back by giving me reasons to use it. We brought it back together," Yarrow corrected, as he always did when she tried to give him all the credit. "You did the hard work of healing. I just made sure you had a safe place to do it." "You did more than that," Tessa insisted. "You loved me when I was unlovable, when I was just a shell of a person. You saw something worth saving, and you saved it." Yarrow pulled her close, and they stood together by the stream with the sounds of their family celebrating in the distance. "I saw a woman who had been dealt a terrible hand, but refused to give up completely," he said. "I saw strength and resilience, even if you could not see it yourself at the time. I saw someone worth fighting for. And I saw a man who hid his own pain behind walls of solitude," Tessa replied. "A man who thought he had to carry everything alone. I saw someone who needed love just as much as I did, even if he could not admit it." They held each other, two people who had started as strangers bound by tragedy and had become partners in every sense of the word. The journey from that first meeting in the cabin in Guthrie to this moment had been long and not always easy, but it had been worth every step. As the sun set on Tessa's 50th birthday, painting the valley in gold and crimson, she looked around at the life she and Yarrow had built. 3 children, now grown, with families of their own. A home filled with love and memories. A partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. And most importantly, joy. The kind of deep, abiding joy that comes from living authentically and loving completely. She smiled then, the bright, genuine smile that had taken so long to return all those years ago. It lit up her face and sparkled in her eyes, and Yarrow smiled back, his own expression softening with love and contentment. "Happy?" he asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Deliriously," Tessa replied, as she always did. "You?" "More than I ever thought possible," Yarrow confirmed, pulling her close for a kiss that held 30 years of love and commitment. They walked back to the celebration, hand in hand, their children and grandchildren welcoming them with hugs and laughter. The evening stretched on, filled with food and stories and music. The kind of perfect family gathering that becomes a treasured memory. Later, after everyone had left, and it was just the two of them again in their cabin, Tessa lay in Yarrow's arms and reflected on the unlikely path her life had taken. If someone had told that grief-stricken woman standing at Samuel's grave that she would find happiness again, would find love deeper and truer than she had ever known, would build a family and a life beyond her wildest dreams, she never would have believed them. But it had all come true, not through magic or miracles, but through the simple human capacity for resilience and the transformative power of love. Yarrow had been right all those years ago when he said broken things could be mended. It just took time, patience, and someone willing to hold the pieces together until the glue set. She was not the same woman who had lost her smile to grief. That woman was gone, transformed by loss and rebuilt by love into someone stronger and wiser. She carried her scars proudly now, proof that she had survived, that she had overcome. And her smile, once lost in the depths of grief, now came easily and often, a gift reclaimed and cherished all the more for having been lost. As she drifted off to sleep in the safety of Yarrow's arms, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, Tessa felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the mountain man who had walked into her darkest hour and refused to let her drown. Gratitude for the second chance at happiness she had been given. Gratitude for every moment, both joyful and sorrowful, that had led her to this place. She had lost her smile to grief, yes. But hidden deep in the darkness, it had waited for someone to find it and bring it back to the light. And Yarrow, her beloved mountain man, had done exactly that. Not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through steady patience and unwavering love. Together, they had healed each other, built a life together, and proven that even the deepest wounds can mend given time and care. It was, Tessa thought as sleep finally claimed her, the most beautiful ending to a story that had begun in such sorrow. And yet, it was not truly an ending at all, but rather a continuation, a chapter in a longer story that would live on through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love triumphing over loss, of hope emerging from despair. And always, always, there would be smiles, bright and genuine, lighting up the valley like sunshine after rain.